Hey guys, this is Really, and this is my Carrion Golem Elementalist in the Hardcore Metamorph League, currently level 98. This build is very, very powerful. I have invested a whole bunch into it. It's doable to budget, but that won't be covered in this video. That will be covered in the next one coming up, because this video would have been too long if I were to try to cover both the budget version and this version as well. So I'll be primarily covering the various reasons that I did certain things in this build and why I chose the gear that I did. The budget version, again, will be covered in another video, but overall, I'm really, really happy with this build. The main breakthrough that happened with Golem, with the Golem build in general, is that Divine Flesh was added in and incorporated to give us that extra elemental mitigation. And with chaos damage being so prominent, it's been more important than ever to have chaos resistance anyways, so yeah. Overall, I've been really happy with the build. It took me a little bit to get used to metamorphs because I was a little bit scared of not having Val Molten Shell or a guard skill in general. I do have Val Grace on this build to help out, but pretty damn happy with the build overall, and it does perform really well. It's got so much mitigation. It's very good at killing Awakener, even more so after 392, although Awakener has somehow ended up being immune to taunt, and you can look at that right there. That mistake probably would have killed most characters. This build just tanks it, and yeah, even freezing some bosses from time to time. But yeah, anyways, hope you guys enjoy, and yeah. So let's go over how I decided to build this character. I will go over the budget version in another video, but it was going to make the video too long to make it all one. So Elemental should be obvious. Elemental ailment immunity, a whole bunch of golem damage, 2 extra golems. Golems are immune to elemental damage. And the other choices for the Elementalist Ascendancy are Paragon of Calamity and Penal of Destruction. Beacon of Ruin just isn't worth running because we're already running Skitterbots, which covers everything that this would give us. This also gives us some extra elemental mitigation and Aura area of effect, and as well as Equilibrium skill area of effect. And the reason we're going Equilibrium on Carrion Golems is to almost abuse certain types of synergy. First of all, elemental damage with attacks is a really good gem, but we're going primarily cold damage conversion. We actually have some fire damage conversion because of gem choices, but it's primarily cold. We'll be utilizing the Hatred aura, as well as we'll be using Skitterbots with Bone Chill to increase cold damage even further. Pretty insane amounts of synergy between the two, between all of that. And then we also get to use Equilibrium on top. So, yeah. It's pretty good. And probably one of the first things I should address with the build is the usage of Primordial Chain. Yes, you could still have Skitterbots with them. I don't know if it's intended. I'm almost afraid to ask, but it's good. I don't even know if it actually counts as non-golem minions for the 8% more damage bonus for the Carrion Golems. If it's not counting, then I mean, the build's still doing amazing damage anyways, and Skitterbots are still really good, so I don't know. Either way, it's working. Yeah. We also get extra buff effect out of it, so extra regen, extra phase damage mitigation, and the damage is even better because of how you build a golem character. So as for how you build it, obviously you want Anima Stone. That's like first and foremost. You want extra golems. Same reason you take Golem Commander. Extra golems are pretty good. The nodes before it are also pretty good. So trying to like anoint it is kind of silly when you get 20% effective buffs and also Golem additive life, because for some reason the additive life on the gem doesn't actually seem to be additive. I don't know why. A lot of confusing things. Minions. Minion builds in a nutshell. Yeah. Anyways, we take a whole bunch of jewel sockets instead of going for a lot of the minion nodes. There's only a few specific minions that we take. The reason we go for jewel sockets is because we want to stack primordial harmonies. Primordial harmonies are like the core part of every single golem build, because not only do they give the golems regen, they give them cooldown reduction, and they give them a lot of damage. More damage than you would get for taking minion nodes in most cases. So overall, they're basically like the old Grand Spectrum builds where you just wanted to stack a whole bunch of jewels for your damage. And yeah, basically cooldown reduction is very important so that they spam their good skills, which have cooldowns on them. Golem damage for each type of golem you have summoned basically means that if you have 3 different types of golem summoned, you have like upwards of 60% damage per jewel socket. And if you have 4 golems like we have here, it's 80%. So primordial harmonies are pretty good. You'll notice I'm actually not using a primordial might for the aggression. That's because I don't feel like I need it. And I'm not even using feeding frenzy on the golems. I'll get into that later, but let's go over the rest of the tree stuff. The spiritual command choice is passed to because it's pretty much just as good as getting another jewel socket and picking up an eminence, for example. It's basically the same amount of damage. You could anoint this instead, but I chose to anoint Grave Pact because that's actually better damage and barely any attack speed lost. We actually gain more attack speed for ourselves. And the reason we go for Spiritual Command is we have a whole bunch of added minion damage because of the mace that we're using, which has the minions have increased attack speed roll. As well as we have a lightning golem. So basically we'll be using Leap Sam to get around, and it also helps us with Vigilant Strike, which I'm using the Vigil Jewel because I like having Fortify up as much as possible. Again, I just wanted to be more tanky. I didn't feel like I needed more damage. So it also gives the golems Fortify, which makes them more tanky, which helps them in situations that I actually found them to have trouble with, like Minotaur, killing my lightning golem from time to time. It's just nice to have. And yeah, we take a lot of life. For obvious reasons. Acro and phase acro was actually a choice that I went for specifically because I wanted this character to focus on bossing. So, this means that we have a chance to dodge spell hits. It means you don't have to rely on making sure that you time your something like Molten Shell perfectly. If you accidentally hit it out of panic, and then the boss does like Die Laser from like Cirrus or whatever, and it's not, and your Molten Shell isn't up. This just gives you more consistent survivability. It did make me feel quite uncomfortable not having Val Molten Shell for things like Legion and Metamorphs, but I've gotten a lot more used to it, especially because Metamorphs have been nerfed quite a bit in 3.9.2. I will skip Metamorphs from time to time, but in general, I usually feel pretty safe doing them, as long as I'm not doing ridiculous extra prod stuff. I do have another version that has Val Molten Shell that goes for something like Soul of Steel, but I'll get into that in the budget variant instead. Indomitable Army was actually something that I chose to drop a jewel socket for. Again, because I had golems dying, especially to Cirrus. First of all, again, with the additive life bonus. Secondly, the fizz damage reduction. The main problem with Cirrus, even though they changed a few things to make the minions take less damage in 3.9.2, the main problem with Cirrus was actually his Corrupting Blood from his Die Laser. The Corrupting Blood actually killed my golems when they had 4.4k regen a second before I had Indomitable Army. With Indomitable Army, they're way more consistent at surviving, and if your Carrion Golems die, it's pretty hard to resummon them. Support Golems dying will happen from time to time, but they're a lot more easy to resummon, and you don't want them dying all the time. So I actually really liked getting Indomitable Army, and I'm probably not going to get rid of it just because it adds that extra layer of comfiness. The last thing to take note of is this. This is Glorious Vanity. This is the reason I have Avatar of Fire. So, Glorious Vanity changes this into Divine Flesh, which makes us take 50% of elemental damage as chaos damage and gives us an extra 10% chaos resistance in exchange for our ES basically doesn't do anything against damage. So, the reason for this is that we don't have great elemental mitigation. It's basically just Paragon of Calamity. So this helps us get the extra elemental mitigation, and this is one of the big breakthroughs that made me want to play this build again, is that it finally has some tank against elemental mitigation other than just fortify and things like that. You'll notice that my Chaos Res actually says 68. This jewel is actually turning 2 of the small nodes into Chaos Res nodes, so I'm actually capped on Chaos Res plus 2 over or so. And this node's actually changing into 9% life. So basically, you want Zabaqua to turn this into Divine Flesh once you can cap your Chaos Res. And if you can get a jewel that has Chaos Res on these nodes, or makes it available, or any sort of res, really. Anything that makes it easier to cap res and get that 85 chaos res is good. Even life is good. Especially if you hit anything on these, especially max res. Any of that is very, very good. So, yeah. Anyways, let's get into the gearing. The mace, I'll post how I crafted this. Don't worry about the movement speed. I basically just Redeemer exalted it because it could get movement speed. I would actually say that a sword is generally better. If you're doing a mace, you have to worry about the strength requirement because this build only gets 164 strength in total out of the tree. So you end up having to get a strength roll on gear. Although you'll probably want 180 strength anyways to wear an astral just to make the res stuff easier. But yeah. Also, a sword looks way cooler on a witch. Let's be honest. But it's basically a +3 with 20% more attack damage, and you may wonder why I chose that over fortify. There's a few reasons for that. First of all, the damage is the exact same between both of these. 2, this is a lot more easy to hit because you don't have to worry about any sort of influence being on the item. Well, you do have to worry about influence being on the item. You want an item that doesn't have it. So the base becomes really cheap. You don't have to worry about fusing things because you could just buy a 6-link. And 3, this actually has higher damage potential because you could corrupt fortify onto one of these, potentially. This is pretty expensive to attempt. You're looking at like 8 exalts per attempt because you got to do Annul suffix, cannot roll attack modifiers, exalt the item, prefixes can't be changed, scour, and then multimod, and then add the socketed support gem stuff and all that. It's a total of 8x plus whatever other crafting costs. So this is pretty expensive. I wouldn't do this. I would go for the budget variant first before, like if you don't have a lot of currency. You can use that with a level 3 in power. You do want at least a level 3 in power before you use one of these. But yeah. And you could use a fortify weapon if you want. That's up to you. I've heard fortify weapons can be pretty cheap on softcore. But yeah. And also the 20% more attack damage is actually better for this than getting, say, 120% minion damage. It actually ends up being better. Just to clarify that. As for the rest of the gear, the Triad grips, I think I already explained that. Primordial Chain, I explained that. Helmet Enchant is probably the next thing to talk about. I went for increased effective buffs granted by Chaos Golems. This is just to get extra fizz damage reduction. You could go for Stone Golems instead. And again, additive damage isn't as good for Golems because, well, we already have a whole bunch of additive damage because of Primordial Harmonies. We have like 800 of it, so why bother with getting like 40% on top of another 800%? It seems a little bit pointless. Rolling this was actually a little bit hard. Getting the minus cold res is probably one of the last things I would actually work on to min-max. I actually think I spent more rolling this helmet than I spent on the mace, and this is like, this is an eye level 86 helmet, and this is the best thing that I got. It's pathetic, I know, but it just does not like rolling good rolls. I don't know. You want +1 for very, very good reason. First of all, level 21 golem gems are really easy to get without quality. I ended up getting quality just working on that for extra minion life, but you want 22 on the Chaos Golem for the reason that at 22, at level 22 Chaos Golem, the phys damage reduction goes from 4 to 5, and because we have so much buff effect, that means that we get a whole bunch extra phys damage reduction out of that. Basically like 7% or something in total, just for getting it from level 21 to 22. Obviously, you want life for good reason. I had an open prefix, so I did phys damage taken as fire, so extra phys damage mitigation. Even though we have a lot of phys damage mitigation, might not even be efficient in some regard, but whatever. Cold res and nearby enemies have minus cold res because we're primarily doing cold damage. The chest, you don't need something that's this good. This is basically a 2-step because my fire res is overcap. But I went for the temple mod chest so that I can multi-mod and get spell dodge on the chest as well as percent increased life. You don't need something this good. You mostly just want the high life. The spell dodge is just extra safety because the more spell dodge, the better. Boots, I actually don't have spell dodge boots yet. But again, we need to get chaos res as much as possible, and we need to sort out res as much as possible because we're doing divine flesh. And I do have the spell dodge enchant for extra spell dodge stuff. I just don't have this spell dodge roll from, say, either incursion rooms or from Redeemer, I think it is, exalts. Still working on that. Again, quality of life stuff. There's a lot of gear improvement you can do with this build overall. Again, chaos res, a lot of life on the rings. Strength on this to sort out the strength problem that I mentioned earlier with wearing gear. And I have fertile catalysts on this. And my belt actually has the resistance catalysts on it just to make sure that I have the chaos and lightning res capped. I could improve this quite a bit by using a hunter belt, but getting a good belt is pretty hard. I'm at a point where improving gear in general is actually quite rough. The jewel is pretty important. I was using life and taunt. That's basically all you really need, although blind also works. And taunt isn't as important anymore. I think I mentioned this already, but Sirius does not retarget if he is taunted anymore. He's still affected by taunt as far as I know, so you'll still get the 10% damage reduction out of that. But the last 2 runs I've done of Sirius, he basically almost never targeted the golems anymore in comparison to before, where he almost always targeted them. Very, very noticeable difference. Flask setup, I screwed up in importing this. This is supposed to be a basalt flask of staunching. I have a seething divine life flask of staunching. I do run 2 different bleed flasks just because I'm paranoid about getting punctured and having my life degen really fast and not having a staunching or a life flask. Just extra safety. Why not? I do have a corrupting blood immunity jewel, which is really, really good for Sirius. But, yeah. Bottled Faith is actually very, very nice. It's not necessary for the build at all. If this is expensive, then don't worry about it. But it does give the golem a little bit of extra regen, as well as increasing the damage taken. And the radius is big, so it's really nice. And you get extra regen yourself as well by being on consecrated ground. There's something somewhere about that. But, yeah, there you go. A lot of regen. It's good. Regen's good. That's how we survive. Quartz Flask for extra dodge. Also phasing is kind of nice. Curse removal, curse immunity, obviously. You kind of want to be curse immune as much as possible. Quicksilver Flask with Adrenaline or the Katarina mod. I prefer the Katarina mod because we don't have any form of stun mitigation other than that we always have Energy Shield because of the Divine Flesh, which gives you a multiplicative 50% chance to avoid stun. It's not additive with anything else, as far as I know. So another 50% plus the extra flask effect that we have from getting profane chemistry, which causes it to be something like, what, 54% chance to avoid stun? It's really nice. I actually prefer that over the extra movement speed. We're leaping really fast anyways, as you see in the beginning clips of the video. Outside of that, summon Carrion Golem. Empower is very important. 4 is really ideal, but empowers have been super overpriced lately, and a level 3 one is very cheap. Multi-strike, obviously important, so that they repeat their good skills. Minion damage, melee fizz, and elemental damage with attacks. Obviously, Awaken Multi-strike would be a massive upgrade, but that shit's overpriced, so fuck it. Awaken melee fizz is pretty damn good. The Intimidate adds some extra damage, and you get the Intimidate just for the quality. And Awaken LE damage with attacks was actually very cheap, so I just ended up buying it actually just recently. So that's why it's not leveled at all. And yeah. Using Leaf Slam with faster attacks, Vigilant Strike. You can change up your movement skill. You could even use Flame Dash and like Ancestral Call, Vigilant Strike. That's something for you to experiment with. Foul Grace for burst survivability. It's kind of nice, but I hate the duration on it being shit. And obviously we got Flesh Offering and Desecrate. And last thing I should probably talk about is the Curse on his setup and the Elemental Equilibrium. I chose for Divine Ire. This is because, one, this is part of the reason I don't have the Aggression Jewel, is that Divine Ire makes it really, really easy to control your minions, actually. You can very quickly tell a minion to attack something by just clicking Divine Ire very fast, and you don't get locked into a casting animation for very long at all. It also covers a massive AoE, and it hits very far in front of you. So, like, if you're really scared, you could change out this elemental weakness to something like Enfeeble, and things ahead of you will get cursed very easily, especially in Delve and things like that. Things like long hallways. Really, really nice. I'm very much enjoying this. Just make sure you keep it at level 1 because it does do fizz damage, and you don't want to fizz reflect yourself to death somehow because you have 180% additive damage for having 9 golems and being an elementalist. That said, that about covers my variant of the build. I'll be going into a more budget variant later. I wish I could make this a short vid, but a lot of things to explain with golem builds, and I don't want to miss anything, and I want to try and address as many questions as possible. Anyways, thanks for watching. I'll be back with a budget vid later. I'll see you guys next time.